You don't walk into the house prime time built and casually admit you tried to ruin his son and expect a new city to just clap it up. Kevin Stefanski thought a public "I'm sorry" about how he handled Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland would soften the blow, smooth things over, and let him turn the page in Atlanta. Instead, he just set the whole city on fire. Within hours, Falcons fans weren't debating playbooks. They were asking how a man who allegedly sabotaged a generational talent out of ego is now supposed to develop Michael Penix Jr. for the future. Local radio is in meltdown mode. Online campaigns to fire a coach who hasn't even led a single game are exploding. And behind the scenes, reports claim Falcons president Matt Ryan and owner Arthur Blank have already huddled behind closed doors to ask one brutal question. Can we actually keep this guy? Or do we eat millions to cut him loose before week 1 even kicks off? To understand why Atlanta is reacting this hard, you have to go back to where this all started, Cleveland. Because in the eyes of a lot of fans, what Kevin Stefanski did there wasn't just a bad fit or a rough year with a rookie. It was a calculated teardown of a young quarterback's career before it really had a chance to start. And that young quarterback wasn't some anonymous mid-round project. It was Shedeur Sanders, Dayan's son, a walking brand, and one of the most talked about prospects in the sport. People didn't just imagine the sabotage, they watched it unfold. They saw Stefanski keep Shedeur standing on the sideline with a clipboard while clearly less gifted quarterbacks ran the offense into the ground. They saw him force Shedeur, when he finally did see the field, into tight, rigid old-school structures that ignored everything that made him special. No tempo, no freedom to adjust, no trust in his processing or mobility. Every snap looked like it came with a leash. And when that offense predictably sputtered under those constraints, fans say Stefanski didn't step to the mic and own it. He didn't say, "That's on me, I need to call a better game." Instead, rumors and anonymous sources started popping up in local coverage, whispers about Shedeur's work ethic, attitude questions, vague concerns about leadership. It was the oldest move in the book. If the scheme fails, blame the kid. That's what made it feel malicious instead of just stubborn. This wasn't a coach and a quarterback failing to click. This was a coach, in the eyes of many, trying to bury the idea that he'd ever been wrong about his depth chart. And he did it at the expense of a rookie who already had the weight of an entire family empire and fanbase behind him. So when Atlanta hired him, they didn't just see a two-time coach of the year. They saw the guy who, in their minds, tried to break a Sanders. They saw a coach who supposedly weaponized leaks, benched the most talented arm in the room, and doubled down on a system that clearly wasn't built for the player the franchise was supposedly investing in. And now, that same coach is walking into a new building, in a black majority city, expected to guide another young quarterback that a franchise is betting its future on. That's not just baggage, that's a lit fuse. And as soon as Stefanski opened his mouth and admitted, even partially, that he mishandled Shedeur in Cleveland, Falcons fans didn't hear growth or accountability. They heard, yes, the thing you were afraid of actually happened. Which is why what started online didn't stay online for long. The Falcons front office thought this was going to be a normal news cycle. Announce the hire, do the press conference, let a few angry tweets fly around. Then everyone calms down, buys their tickets, and talks themselves into, maybe this is exactly what we needed. That's not what happened. The second Atlanta officially handed the headset to Stefanski, the reaction stopped looking like random outrage and started looking like an organized campaign. A brand new account called "Fire Stefanski Now" exploded, pulling in tens of thousands of followers in a matter of hours. A dedicated Reddit community formed with one goal: document everything he did to Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland and make sure it never happens in Atlanta. They weren't just venting, they were building a case. Fans dug up old pressers where Stefanski talked around questions about Shedeur. They clipped drives where the play calling boxed him in. They laid timeline receipts next to anonymous media stories and said, "Look at how the leaks line up with when the offense started catching criticism." It wasn't chaos, it was homework. And then they took that homework to the street. On what was supposed to be a quiet weekend at Flowery Branch, more than 2,000 fans showed up outside the Falcons' facility. Not for a game, not for a draft party, for a protest. They brought banners. "Sabotage has no place in Atlanta. We remember Shedeur. You can't make us root for this." Local news helicopters hovered over the complex. National sports shows that usually only talk about Atlanta in passing suddenly broke into their usual segments, with live shots of angry fans lined up at the team's front door. What was supposed to be a clean, corporate coaching transition had turned into a public indictment before Stefanski could even run his first practice. And here's what really shook the building. This wasn't just about X's and O anymore. The crowd wasn't chanting about root concepts or third down tendencies. They were calling him a villain. They were calling the hire disrespectful. They were connecting Cleveland, Shedeur, and Atlanta into one story. "You tried that up there. You're not doing it here." Protests by themselves don't usually get coaches fired in the NFL. Owners have sat through boos, banners, even bags over heads before. But what made this different was what the protest turned into next. The fans stopped just yelling at cameras. They started attacking the only thing owners truly fear losing: guaranteed money. If there's one thing NFL owners understand down to the decimal, it's recurring revenue. That's why the next move from the Atlanta fan base hit harder than any chant outside the facility. A coalition of more than 200 long-time season ticket holders, people who have held prime lower bowl seats for years, did something owners usually assume fans will never actually do. They put it in writing. According to reports, this group drafted a formal certified letter and sent it directly to Arthur Blank's office. No hashtags, no vague threats, a clear ultimatum. If Kevin Stefanski is on the sideline wearing Falcons gear in Week 1, we will not renew. Not might not. Not we're upset. A straight line between one coach and millions of dollars in future ticket money evaporating on purpose. And they backed it up with proof. Screenshots started hitting social media, canceled auto renewals, emails confirming dropped accounts. Calls to the ticket office where reps were told point blank, "We're out until this hire is reversed." These weren't nosebleed seats. These were high-value season packages, the kind that anchor the franchise's revenue model every year. Then the pressure spread sideways. Local bar owners and restaurant partners quietly let their contacts in the front office know they weren't thrilled about hosting Stefanski watch parties. A few even hinted they'd be more selective about which games they'd push big promos for if the vibe around the team stayed toxic. Corporate sponsors, who hate being attached to controversy more than anything, started checking in, asking versions of the same polite question: "Is this going to calm down or get worse?" Suddenly, this wasn't about internet anger. It was about line items. Because when you add it all up, legacy season tickets, suite holders reconsidering renewals, sponsors getting nervous, you're not talking about a few angry fans anymore. You're talking about real money. The kind of money that funds payrolls, pays bonuses, and justifies a billion-dollar stadium existing in the first place. And that's the moment every owner reaches for their favorite shield. Not a cornerback, not a pass rusher. The national sports media. Right as the financial pressure started to build, a familiar pattern appeared. TV personalities and big-name analysts going on air, not to analyze the football fit, but to scold the fans, to defend the hire, to say everyone needed to give Stefanski a fair shot. On paper, their arguments sounded reasonable. In reality, they poured gas on a fire that was already creeping toward the owner's box. Once the threat shifted from angry tweets to canceled money, You could almost feel the media machine flip on. Suddenly, the same shows that barely mentioned the Falcons in a normal week were running full segments on overreaction in Atlanta. Highly paid analysts and ex-players went on air and hit all the familiar beats. Kevin Stefanski is a two-time Coach of the Year. Fans are being emotional. You can't judge a man's future by one situation in Cleveland. Shedeur Sanders might not have been as blameless as people think. In other words, calm down, trust the process, let the adults handle it. That might have worked 10 years ago. But this time, the fans came prepared. Every time a big-name talking head tried to paint Stefanski as a misunderstood mastermind, the comment sections flooded with receipts. Clips of press conferences where his words about young quarterbacks didn't match what was happening on the field. In-zone angles showing Shedeur making big-time throws despite unimaginative calls and stale designs. Side-by-side timelines matching offensive struggles to the exact moment. Anonymous concerns about Sanders began popping up in local reports. When a national voice hinted that maybe Shedeur was the problem, entire threads appeared underneath, ranking his production versus the vet Stefanski actually trusted. When someone tried to brush off the Cleveland saga as just a bad year, people posted multi-minute compilations of questionable usage, passive-aggressive quotes, and clear scheme mismatches. And the more the on-air talent insisted that fans didn't understand how the league works, the more it confirmed exactly what the protesters already believed: that the establishment will lie with a straight face to protect its own. What was meant to be damage control ended up as proof of bias. Instead of cooling things off, the coverage created a second wave of anger, this time not just at Stefanski, but at the entire ecosystem trying to rehabilitate his image while minimizing what happened to Shedeur. It stopped being, "We don't like this coach." It became, "We see how this game is played and we're not playing along." And under all of that, there was one subject the shows tiptoed around or avoided completely. The part that made this hire feel like a direct slap in the face to Atlanta specifically. It wasn't just about a coach and a quarterback. It was about who that quarterback was, what city he was walking into now, and an NFL history people are tired of pretending doesn't exist. This is the part the national shows keep skating around, because the minute you say it out loud, you can't pretend this is just football business anymore. You don't take a white head coach who, in the eyes of many, systematically benched, boxed in, and smeared a confident black quarterback, and drop him into Atlanta like it's just another stop on the coaching carousel. Atlanta isn't a generic NFL market. It's the unofficial capital of Black America, a city built on Black entrepreneurship, Black culture, Black music, Black politics. The Falcons' identity is tied directly to that. From the fans in the stands to the faces on the billboards, this isn't some neutral, sanitized environment where you can ignore the cultural piece and just talk about scheme fit. So when the Falcons' front office hired Kevin Stefanski, a lot of people in that city didn't just see a coach coming off a bad stint in Cleveland. They saw a pattern. Prominent voices in the community were quick to point it out. For decades, the league has had an ugly, whispered history with certain kinds of black quarterbacks, the ones who don't fit the old, quiet, "yes sir" template. The ones who show up with swagger, speak their minds, come with a brand, and refuse to shrink themselves to make anyone more comfortable. Too often, those guys get labeled as immature, uncoachable, or a distraction, while other players doing the exact same things in different packaging get called fiery competitors and marketable leaders. And in this story, that quarterback wasn't just any player. It was a Sanders. Day in Coach Prime, Sanders has turned his name into an empire. He flipped the college game upside down. He turned Colorado into a cultural event. Shedeur didn't enter the league as a broke rookie hopping for a logo deal. He walked in a multimillionaire with his own endorsements, his own fan base, and a level of influence that makes traditional executives nervous. When Stefanski, as the story goes, tried to humble that, by keeping him on the bench, by forcing him into a system that didn't match his strengths, by letting negative narratives breathe instead of crushing them publicly, he didn't just clash with a player. He picked a fight with the prime effect. And that's why this outrage in Atlanta has reached way beyond hardcore Browns or Falcons fans. You're seeing support and commentary from people who don't care about Cleveland or NFC South standings. They care about what it looks like when a coach apparently tries to break a young black quarterback with visible power and then gets rewarded with another job in a black majority city like nothing happened. For a lot of people in Atlanta, this hire felt less like a fresh start and more like a test. Are we going to let that same energy into our building? Are we going to let someone who, in their view, already targeted a confident black QB now stand over another young passer and say, "Trust me, this time I'll get it right"? That's why the signs outside Flowery Branch didn't just say, "Fire Stefanski." They said things like, "Not in Atlanta, and we won't let you bring that here." And as loud as the fans have been, there's one group that's been even more shaken by this, but can't say it into a microphone without risking everything. If you've been wondering why current Falcons players haven't gone on camera and torched this hire, there's a simple answer. They like their jobs. NFL contracts are stacked with non-disparagement clauses and conduct detrimental language. You publicly call your head coach a problem, and you're not just risking a fine. You're risking playing time, future deals, and a permanent label as a locker room cancer that can follow you around the league longer than any stat line. But just because they're not saying it into a microphone doesn't mean they're not saying it at all. According to multiple quiet reports and whispers from people close to the team, the Falcons' locker room has not exactly rolled out the red carpet for Kevin Stefanski. Veteran players have allegedly held closed-door, players-only meetings to talk about the hire. Not scheme, not terminology, trust. They watched what happened in Cleveland. They saw how quickly a promising young quarterback, with big expectations and a massive spotlight, was turned into a scapegoat the second things went sideways. They don't have to love or hate Shedeur personally to see the pattern. If he'd do that to a quarterback with that much talent and that much public support, what do you think he'll do to a receiver on the last year of his deal? Or a lineman who gives up a big sack? Or a backup who drops a critical pass in prime time? That's the fear. Not just is he a good play caller, but what happens the first time this goes bad? Reports claim some players have already found a workaround. They're not going to torch Stefanski on TV, but they are allegedly reaching out through back channels, friends, community leaders, even protest organizers, to quietly send one blunt message. Keep the pressure on. Essentially, the fans are being used as the blunt instrument the players can't be. The people in the stands and online can say what the people in the locker room can't, at least not without nuking their own careers. For the first time in a long time, you've got a fan movement and a player base allegedly aligned in private, pushing in the same direction against the same target. That's unprecedented power. Because when the building is uneasy, the sponsors are nervous, the ticket base is threatening to walk, and the city's cultural leaders are publicly calling you out, it doesn't matter how many spin segments ESPN runs. The walls start closing in. And all of that leaves one man standing in the dead center of the storm, staring at two bad options and trying to figure out which one ruins his legacy less. Arthur Blank didn't buy an NFL franchise to end up here, trapped between a coach he just hired and a city that wants him gone before he calls his first play. On paper, this was supposed to be the move that finally brought stability. Blank is in his 80s. His entire focus right now is legacy. One ring, one parade, one moment where the Falcons are more than a meme about 28-3. So he and president of football operations Matt Ryan went out and grabbed a decorated, offensive-minded coach with real experience. Check the box, calm the fan base, let the grown-up run the room. Instead, he got a public relations grenade. Now, reports claim Blank and Ryan have already held emergency, closed-door meetings asking the ugliest question an owner ever has to ask himself in February. Did we just hire a mistake we can't afford to keep? If he fires Stefanski now, Blank sends a loud message. The fans were right. The front office misread the room. A billionaire owner and his entire search process got it dead wrong. That's humiliation on a national scale. Other owners will quietly question his judgment. Agents will wonder how stable the Falcons really are if they'll blow up a hire within weeks. And on top of that, he'd be eating a massive buyout, millions of dollars going to a coach who never even coached a regular season snap in Atlanta. But if he keeps him, he risks something even worse, indifference. He risks a half-empty Mercedes-Benz stadium, shots on TV of empty lower bowl seats while angry fans watch from home out of principle. He risks season ticket revenue continuing to drip away. He risks corporate partners slowly distancing themselves from a brand that feels radioactive. Most dangerously, he risks a locker room that shows up on Sundays because they're professionals, but never truly buys into the man at the front of the room. That's the billionaire nightmare. Pay a ton of money to protect your pride, then watch the building hollow out from the inside anyway. And this is where that soft media argument, judge him on what he does in Atlanta, not what he did in Cleveland, completely falls apart. A blown fourth down call. You can judge that in a new place. Poor clock management. Maybe he's learned. But deliberately undercutting a young quarterback, letting negative stories drift to the press, and in fans' eyes, choosing self-preservation over development for an entire season. That's not a football mistake. That's a character reveal. Character doesn't reboot just because the GPS says, now entering Georgia. The fans know it. The locker room knows it. And deep down, Blank probably knows it too, which is why every day he waits, the cost of either choice gets higher. And that's why this whole situation has already outgrown one coach and one quarterback. It's turned into something the NFL hasn't had to face at this scale before. A fan base using its money, its voice, and its receipts to challenge the entire way power has always worked in this league. For decades, the NFL has counted on one simple truth. No matter what, fans will show up. You can botch hires. You can swing and miss on quarterbacks. You can recycle the same football guy cliches at every podium. As long as the logo is on the helmet and the schedule comes out on time, people will fill the seats, buy the merch, and argue about depth charts until kickoff. Atlanta just proved that era is cracking. What's happening around the Stefanski hire is way bigger than one coach or even one franchise. It's a full-on stress test of the old NFL power structure, and for the first time, the fans are the ones applying the pressure on purpose. Not by accident, not as background noise, as an organized, strategic force. Look at how complete the pushback has been. Emotionally, with protests and signs and a very clear moral line, sabotage has no place in this city. Financially, with season ticket holders canceling renewals and sponsors quietly asking, what exactly did we just attach our names to? Digitally, with receipts, cut-ups, timelines, and community-built dossiers that strip the usual PR spin down to bare facts and patterns. For years, owners operated like the story only moved in one direction, from the top down. They hired, they justified. The media smoothed it over. Fans either swallowed it or screamed into the void. Then Sunday rolled around and the turnstiles kept spinning. Now, the story is moving the other way. A fan base in a majority black city is looking at an old NFL pattern. Confident black QB gets labeled, undermined, and discarded while the coach gets recycled, and openly saying, no, Not here, not again, not with that player and not with that coach. And they're backing it up with something the league has never had to confront at this scale: coordinated, targeted economic resistance. Whether Arthur Blank fires Kevin Stefanski tomorrow or digs in and rides this storm into week 1, the damage to the old playbook is already done. Every owner in every other city is watching Atlanta and taking notes. Every young quarterback, every assistant coach, every agent is watching to see if fan power actually changes an outcome that, in past eras, would have been treated as untouchable. And somewhere in all of this, one truth has cut through more clearly than any PR statement. You can bench a player in the dark, you can leak on him in the shadows, but you cannot expect a modern fan base to pretend they didn't see it once all the lights are on. If this is what happens when you cross a Sanders and then walk into Atlanta like nothing happened, imagine what the next fan base will do the next time a coach thinks he can sabotage a career and hide behind the shield. The easy way to frame all of this is as payback. Stefanski messed with Shedeur, now the Falcons are paying the price. That's the surface-level headline. It's dramatic, it's loud, and it fits the social media attention span. But if you really zoom in on what's happening, the story is a lot bigger and a lot more important than simple revenge for what went down in Cleveland. Because what Atlanta fans, Sanders supporters, and even quiet voices in that Falcons locker room are really doing is drawing a hard line around what respect is supposed to look like in modern sports. They're saying, you don't get to destroy a player's reputation to save your own, and then sell yourself as a leader of men somewhere else like nothing happened. You don't get to walk into a black cultural capital after allegedly undercutting a young black quarterback and act surprised when people check your resume harder than your win-loss record. You don't get to use the same old playbook, blame the star, gaslight the fanbase, let the media run interference, and expect everyone to nod along in 2026 like it's still 1996. That's new. For years, players had to swallow situations like this in silence. Fans had to piece the story together with no proof and no platform. Coaches and owners controlled the narrative, and if you didn't like it, your only option was to boo harder and hope someone upstairs eventually listened. Now, fans have film, they have clips, they have group chats, Discords, Reddit threads, and X accounts with bigger followings than some official team pages. Players have indirect channels where they can cause in a movement without putting their names on a tweet. Cities like Atlanta have cultural influence that stretches way beyond the 60 minutes on a Sunday broadcast. So when a coach crosses a line, the response isn't just anger. It's organization. It's here are the receipts, here are the sponsors, here are the season ticket numbers. Here is what we'll do to your bottom line if you pretend this is just another hire. And even if Kevin Stefanski somehow survives this storm, if Arthur Blank bets on his pride, doubles down, and dares the fanbase to stay mad for 17 weeks, it won't undo what's already been revealed. The next time a coach thinks he can bully a young quarterback in the dark, leak on him in the press, and then reboot his image in a new city, he'll have to wonder if that city's fans are taking notes. Because thanks to what's happening in Atlanta, there's a new rule book in play now. You can still make ruthless decisions in this league. You just can't do it and expect nobody to turn on the lights. At the end of the day, this whole saga stopped being about one coach, one quarterback, or even one franchise a long time ago. It's about what happens when fans finally realize they're not just background noise in a billion-dollar operation. They're the power source. It's about a young black quarterback with a massive brand refusing to be quietly buried. It's about a city like Atlanta saying, we see how this league has moved in the past, and we're not letting that pattern walk in our front door unchallenged. Whether Arthur Blank fires Kevin Stefanski tomorrow or forces him onto that sideline and lives with the fallout, The message is already out there. You can't sabotage a player in the shadows and expect the next locker room, the next fan base, and the next city not to pull those receipts into the light. Now I want to hear from you. Should Atlanta stand its ground and demand Stefanski's removal, or give him a shot and see if he proves everyone wrong?